What's up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and as always, it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Today, I'm taking a look at the walking simulator known as What Remains of Edith Finch. After having beat it before a while ago but losing the footage, I was happy to be able to get some hands on the Xbox One code for this game that's coming out in a couple days. So let's see if my original thoughts on the game have changed. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for What Remains of Edith Finch. All hail the Salmon King, raise a glass to the world's most messed up family tree fort, and 23andMe DNA testing for the bad luck gene. Graphics start first. You know, make no mistake, when you're sneaking through a toy box secret tunnel into a spray insulation phone locked room to find out what kind of shit happened to a family, the game actually can look pretty wonderful with an almost surreal storybook quality to it that I think is mimicked both in the main story backbone as well as in some of the visions that are passed on by the inhabitants of House What the Fuck. But when you start moving, a lot of that can fall apart, especially on the console. Now, luckily, this doesn't really hold true to the PC version, which seems to run fairly well, but on the consoles, it's locked to 30 frames per second. When I say locked, I'm actually lying because it's not at all. It dives below on the PS4 and on the Xbox One with some stuttering in many locations. Now, while the game uses motion blur to try to hide a lot of this fact, it is actually noticeable. Does it detract? Yes, for absolute sure. Does it make it unplayable? No, not at all. And even on the PC, especially when the game tries to go out of its comfort zone with any kind of really fast movement or higher tempo scenes, if you look around, low detailed textures can really start to pop up and detract from the overall look. I would say this, I liked Edith. I think that it can be beautiful and moody and emotional in its delivery of the game worlds, but other times it looks a bit raw. Sound, music, and voice.
Including the wise Calico who'd insisted on inviting him.
It sure made him happy.
And when it comes to audio category, sound, as you guys know, is always up first. And this is actually excellent. The sound in Edith Finch is certainly, I think, a highlight. And without spoiling various locations or user storylines, I can say the game spreads its wings very quickly when it comes to expectation and delivering them. Very good sound. Music. Actually, I like this. The choice of music, I think, is important to impart a sense of connection between the visual activity and location and the rest of the senses. And I have to say, I really dug Edith, especially when you look at the duality of what you're actually experiencing versus maybe what's actually going on in the real world. And I love the fact that the game has a real tenacity for dropping the music entirely, which can reset your ear from that numbness that many of us get when a game's big orchestra soundtrack thinks that this baby rattle's the coolest thing ever and a friggin' Conan needs to be wielding it. And it also has no problem interjecting different pieces, brief but heavy interludes that sort of lock up and introduce locations or actions as important or emotional. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this is melancholy as hell and sounds like something that someone missing their St. John's wort pills might write. But come on, this is basically a game about a family with such bad luck. If they were a racehorse and broke their leg, folks would congratulate them. Voice. You know, this is actually really good, especially with the main character's consistent hinting at the darker things that lurked in the past of the family, to the various voices that exist in the past to tell us of those who've come and almost assuredly died horribly before. However, and this is a big however, there's a particular scene where you're reading a comic book. Now, anybody who's played this knows what I'm talking about. The narrative main character is fine, but my God, the recording audio for the two people involved is terrible. It's bad enough that you can actually hear the mixing errors and an odd tonal resonance of where at least one of them recorded it differently than the other. Additionally, since it's one of the most overly strange and honestly cool parts of the game, this was noticeable all the more. Just really surprising poor quality when everything else within the game seemed fine. As a package, I'd say it's good, with one speed bump. And of course, that brings us to gameplay. There's barely any, so let's move on. Nah, just kidding. Edith tells the story of a girl who returns to the family home, tin roof rusted by 22 weeks, and then is tasked with climbing trees, climbing walls, rummaging through spider-infested attics, and everything else to investigate the history of her predecessors and write them down in a journal for her child. Yeah, because basically, she's writing a book almost assuredly poised to cause someone to read it and then suicide themselves, because this family's life makes fairy tales look like friggin' Care Bears. Now, to me, the best part of the game is, of course, these interludes into the other characters' past lives. And I have to tell you, there are some really good moments here, like flying a kite in a windstorm or attempting to do the impossible and swing yourself 360 on a swing set like a 7-year-old version of Mythbusters. At those times, there's some really good storytelling. But if you're thinking, man, that sounds pretty mundane, It actually is, and that's a problem I'll talk about in a second. It helps that the game is basically a direct copy of the Winchester Mystery House, even in many of the overall plot devices, reasonings used in just general location. That mirror into the descent of despair that some can drop into when hopelessness prevails is actually really well done here. Sadly, this is also what focuses the attention on some of the weakest elements of Edith, and that is in fact calling this a game at all. To do so stretches almost to the breaking point what that name means, because for the most part, Edith is a specifically directed, completely linear, without puzzles storybook of someone, many someone's, tragic ends. And add to that the fact that it's woefully short on both interaction as well as content, and really you look at a Telltale game and you think, man, that's a JRPG compared to this. Now, we've seen these kind of games before, hinging on mystery instead of meatiness, and many times that's won out. And in some ways, I truly, absolutely believe that Edith delivers higher than even some of the classics in the genre, but unfortunately, it also delivers lower than some of them. And I gotta say this is the first game that I think I've ever played a second time through and was still surprised that it ended so soon, and with so, I guess, little fanfare. What does that bring us to? Fun factor. Edith is not fun in the truest sense. It's a mystical storybook that instead of turning pages to get to the next chapter, you walk forward, hit a button, and then do so. But you know what? I actually was okay with that in some elements, but I certainly wouldn't say, man, I had a lot of fun with Edith. I love me some of these titles, but they have to elevate themselves if they're going to focus on one core aspect so much. And in many ways, Edith failed me there. Now, I know some people out there have found one or two stories exploitive, supposedly, or thought they were. I didn't. I also didn't find sadness or happiness or pretty much anything else in the game. And when you look at it, I think that's really reflective of what's going on with Edith. The fact is that it's just a storybook, and if you're not interested in that fiction, then that storybook is probably not going to interest you. Unlike in a game where there's actual choice and interaction, you might be able to jump in a little bit more. You know, when it comes down to it, I know that for some people, this is going to be a very emotional series of stories. And I think there's another contingent of gamers out there, either due to no connection to their own lives or even understanding of these different situations, who are going to look at it and just go, this is really friggin' boring. I would say I'm probably somewhere in the middle. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale. This is actually a wait for a sale. I think at about 50%, at about $10 for 2 hours, that would be somewhat acceptable to sort of sit down to what is basically a movie that you play through at your own pace. This has less interaction than even a Telltale title and is actually in some ways just a little bit longer, but its production values are much higher, and I really did enjoy that. It's just the fact that, once again, if this doesn't resonate with you, there isn't gameplay to bring you in. Even though we tease Telltale titles all the time, there is some gameplay there that can do that. And here, there just isn't that much. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Maybe check out Twitter or Patreon. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. And always remember this. Just because you think that you and I don't agree about games doesn't mean you're right. Peace out. Enjoy the rest of your week.